Hi, everybody. I just wanted to go through the three Greek philosophers that we're going to be working with on Monday in class. And so I'm just going to give you some basic background, some thoughts about their approaches to philosophy. And that way we have some sort of context going into that class period where we will be discussing some of their philosophical themes throughout some of their readings. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And the areas that I intend to focus on here are just what is true? What is reality? How do we define truth? How do we find it? And how we define it? And then again, we want to make sure that we're considering these things in terms of how they're related to our learning goals. How does religion or belief systems, how do they try to guide human behavior? And what is the relationship between religions and power? So Socrates, we have here, search for truth. His search for truth, it begins with the Oracle of Delphi. And at the Oracle, a friend goes to visit, and this friend asks, who's the smartest person in the world? And the Oracle says, it's Socrates. And Socrates is the smartest person in the world. You can see visiting with the Oracle down here. And so Socrates then sets out to see if this is in fact true. And this is getting at the heart of how Socrates discovers truth. He goes around, he challenges these incredibly bright thinkers, asking them questions about really difficult abstract concepts: virtue, truth, justice. How do you define these things? How do we see them? How do we know when we see these things? And we actually don't have any writings from Socrates. What we do have are they're called Platonic dialogues because they're written by one of his best and brightest students, Plato. And he kind of keeps track of these dialogues. Whether or not they're true is another thing. But basically, this is the formation of what is called the Socratic method. So if you've ever done Socratic seminars, the idea is that we don't really have answers to these questions, but we're trying to find truth by continuously questioning. Okay, we received an answer. Great. I would need you to then push beyond that and find that answer out. Can we determine if that answer is true or not? Can we support that answer? Are there multiple truths that we need to explore? And so this constant questioning technique that Socrates uses is really one of the things that he is most known for. Unfortunately, by going around and spreading the ideas of the Socratic method, he has some charges brought up against him. Impiety, the first one, lack of respect for the gods. Because if you are constantly questioning whether things are true or not and not accepting them based on what the Greek mythology tells you, you are showing impiety. And the second one is actually corrupting the youth, because he has all of these, teenagers following him around, and they are taking this information and then they are using it. They're using the Socratic method in order to determine what is true. And that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Think about when you're a kid and you're constantly asking your parents questions. Eventually, your parents become exasperated and say, because I said so. And that idea is really what the whole of Athens feels about Socrates. So he's charged with corrupting corrupting the youth. And at his trial for his defense, Socrates has said, listen, if you just shut up and start to teach like a normal human, we'll let you go. And Socrates says, no, I cannot consciously make that decision to stop the search for truth. This is how truth is found. This is how we are able to find reality. And during his defense, he kind of makes fun of everybody. He makes fun of essentially the lawyers for the other side and jokes around about how stupid they are. And basically, that's not really the way you want to go about it. You're insulting the judge. That's not great. And so he's going to be put to death. And we have this famous work that we're going to talk about later on this year, The Death of Socrates. And so we're going to come back to this. But take a look at this artwork if you want to pause the video for a few moments. What do you see? What do you observe? What can we infer about what the artist puts into this? What does Socrates look like? Socrates is this dude here in the middle. How is he depicted, and how does that influence the way that we think about him and his death? That brings us to his most famous student. This is Plato. Plato, 429 BCE to 347 BCE, also in Athens, as we mentioned, because he's one of Socrates' students. And here we have his famous school, the Academy, the School of Athens. This is depicted, another famous work. This is going to come out of the Italian Renaissance by Raphael. And so we're going to be exploring this a little bit. But again, I'd encourage you, pause the video, Take some time to really look through this work, analyze it a little bit, see what you think. He talks a lot about reality and truth in what is called ideal forms. The basic concept, and this is way oversimplified, but this is a chair. This is also a chair. Are we able to define what is ideal based on our depictions of what a chair should look like? Should it look like this? Maybe it's like this. Got some, studding to the outside. Got that retro look to it. Period piece. Is it this? Incredibly ergonomically designed in order to make your sitting experience as enjoyable as possible? Are we then trying to make sure that we multitask? What is the ideal form of a chair, and how do we know when we approach that ideal form of a chair? And he applies this to government. And so we have here the republic, and he decides that a republic is truly the best form of government. And one of the other ways that he uses to describe how to discover ideal forms or what is real is through the allegory of the cave. And an allegory, we know this from other classes, hopefully English class. You've come across some allegories using a scenario to describe something else as a stand-in for something else. And so we have here the allegory of the cave, where you have some people sitting down here and they're chained, they cannot move, they cannot see what's next to them. All they can see is the shadows cast by this fire on the wall across from them. And so the question then becomes, what exactly is reality? And we're going to tear into that a little bit more next week. This is just a meme depicting the idea of Plato's cave. Hopefully it makes more sense later on. And then finally we have Aristotle. And we've already kind of touched on Aristotle because Aristotle is the teacher for Alexander the Great. So we have Alexander the Great over here. He is Alexander's private tutor. And Aristotle, like Plato was for Socrates, is a student of Plato. And Aristotle's look at reality or truth isn't necessarily just from explaining through questions and questioning techniques, or about looking at, okay, how do we assess what is ideal? But it's actually through testing. And so he's an early advocate for what we would think of as the scientific method. Now, the method as we think of it today comes much later. Sir Francis Bacon is going to be the dude who does that during the Enlightenment, Scientific Revolution time period. But Aristotle advocates for this concept of taking an idea, testing it out, observing it, and questioning it. And so there's where we see Socrates and the Socratic method popping up. And he's also going to use something called syllogisms. You start with a major premise that is known to be true, then you add in a minor premise that you believe is true, and then you come up with a conclusion based on that. Similar to transitive property. If A equals B and B equals C, then the conclusion that we can draw is that A must equal C. The problem comes in when one of these premises are opinions and not actual fact. For example, if our major premise is all teachers are cool, and our minor premise is Mr. Slim is a teacher, then our conclusion is Mr. Slim is cool. And we know that is not the case. So depending upon how you approach the major and minor premises will determine the validity of the conclusions that you draw from this syllogism. So we do need to keep that in mind. But again, it's another way to try and examine what is true. We're going to be using this knowledge of these three people to then dig into some documents regarding them next week. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day.